Hey guys, it's Jeremy here on Mental Music Meltdown, back with another video. What do I have for you today, guys? As you can see from the thumbnail and the title, we're going back to the series I started about a month ago entitled Through the Decades. This will be episode number 2. If you didn't see my first one for Iron Maiden, definitely check that out. I'll put a link at the end of the video to check that out. So what I do is I pick some of my favorite bands, or just bands that have a long history spreading over 30, 40 plus years. And I picked my favorite and least favorite album from that band through the decades. And I decided to go with none other than AC/DC for this episode. Definitely one of my favorite bands of all time. Have a really distinct sound. They're the masters of writing hard rock anthems. Really memorable songs. Do they write albums that are very similar to each other? Yes, you can probably say that, but they found a formula that works. And so I mess with it if it's working. They definitely have some albums I definitely prefer over others. And we'll go through each decade and give my thoughts on the albums from each decade. And then I'll list my favorite and least favorite from that decade. And please, down below, if you're new, hit the subscribe button to join the family. And list your favorite and least favorite albums from AC/DC for each decade as well. Just to get some conversation going in the comments. So let's start with the 1970s, which is where they began. I'm not including the Australian releases because they had two albums, High Voltage and TNT, that were Australia only. So I'm starting at just the High Voltage, the international release. So for the 1970s, we have High Voltage in 1976. And I'll pop up the album up here. And then after that, we have Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap in 76 as well. And then we have Let There Be Rock in 1977, Power Age in 1978, and Highway to Hell in 1979. So I love back in the day when bands used to put out albums every year and release really good stuff. Nowadays, bands sometimes don't put albums out for like 8 years, 5 years. It's kind of annoying, but it is what it is. So out of these albums, the one that stood out to me easily for the best album of this decade was Highway to Hell. I love some of the other albums. The only one that was kind of competing would be Let There Be Rock is really good too. I love that album. It's one of my favorites. But Highway to Hell is just so iconic and just legendary. It's the last album to feature Bon Scott on vocals. Rest in peace, brother. He's definitely missed. He was a great frontman. But the songs on this album are just so classic and unforgettable. If you go with like Highway to Hell, Girls Got Rhythm, Touch Too Much, Night Prowler, Get It Hot, Shot Down in Flames, it's just top to bottom, it's just a crazy good album and really, really good. So I had those no-brainer for that one. And for my least favorite album from this decade, I'm gonna have to go with, it's kind of a tough one because I like all these albums to some degree. I'm going to go with the Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap. It does have some good songs. I love the title track, and I think Jailbreak's on that one as well. But I think it's just the album I go back to the least. I don't own a copy of it yet. I'm definitely going to eventually own all these. I think AC/DC, I have about 10 other albums out of 16, so I'm like a little over halfway. I haven't picked them all up yet. But yeah, I'm going to go with Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap. It was either that or Power Age are the two I kind of listened to the least, I think, from this decade. But they're still really good. And then, guys, going into the 80s, we have Back in Black in 1980. For those about to rock, we salute you, 1981. Flick the Switch, 83. Fly on the Wall, 85. And then Blow Up Your Video, 88. Again, for this one, my favorite album was a no-brainer. It's easily Back in Black. The first album to include Brian Johnson on vocals. It's their highest selling album of all time. I think it sold like 30 plus million copies. Is some ridiculous amount. The production on this album is amazing. It's got so much power to it, but clarity, and it's polished but rough at the same time. It's just a really good album. Hell's Bells, Shoot to Thrill, Back in Black, the title track, You Shook Me All Night Long is overplayed, but it's a classic song. Rock and Roll Ain't Noise Pollution, like, it has some of the most iconic songs of all time. And I came into the band a little bit later because I'm not old enough to listen to these guys back in the day. When I got into this band, Brian Johnson was the vocalist, so that's kind of my entry point. Was probably around Back in Black was probably one of my gateway ones, or even the 90s. I think it was even later. But Back in Black was one of the first one I heard a lot of songs from. So that's easily my favorite from the decade. My least favorite, I'm going to have to go with... I'm going to go with Blow Up Your Video. I think that's probably the one I listen to the least. A lot of people give flack to Fly on the Wall, but I find that one of their heavier albums, and it's actually pretty good. Like, I think it's a very underrated album. Same with Flick of the Switch. That's a really good album from them. It's definitely an underrated one in my opinion. But Blow Up Your Video is just one I don't really go back to as much. And but for those about to rock, We Salute You is a killer album. That's definitely one of my favorite. It'd be a top 5 or 6 of their whole discography. But I'm going to go with Blow Up Your Video for this one. And then going into the 90s, we have The Razor's Edge, 1990, Ball Breaker, 95, just the two. So this will be very, very easy. Number one, easily, Razor's Edge is my favorite from the 90s. I think this might have been my introduction to the band, because 1990 I would have been 11. So I think this was the first album I owned from these guys. It was actually one of the first 20 albums I think I ever purchased when I was a kid. And it has like the title track, Razor's Edge is so good. Of course, Thunderstruck is an amazing song. Money Talks, Are You Ready? Like, it just has so many good songs on this album. This is probably a top 5 album AC/DC for me of all time. Maybe even top 3. It's really, really good. I love this album. And then by default, that kind of just leaves Ball Breaker as my least favorite because it's the only other one from this decade. Still a solid album. I listen to it a fair amount still. Hard as a Rock, Cover You in Oil, and Hail Caesar were the singles. But the Boogeyman, The Fuhrer, the Honey Roll, like, there's good songs top to bottom on this album. It's pretty solid. And going into the between 2000 and 2009, so the early 2000s, we got Stiff Upper Lip in the year 2000, Black Ice in 2008. So again, we have just the 2 albums. I'm going to go with, I think Black Ice is my favorite. I remember picking that up early in my AC/DC buying, purchasing. I always liked that album a lot. The song, Rock and Roll Train, I used to love that song. I used to play it over and over. Big Jack was good too. Anything Goes, Skies on Fire. The whole side one is really, really good. I remember listening to this album quite a lot. And again, by default, that kind of just leaves Stiff Upper Lip as my least favorite from the 2000-2009 time frame. But the title track's good. Safe in New York City, Satellite Blues, Meltdown is still pretty solid top to bottom. I think there's just more songs on Black Ice that I prefer more over Stiff Upper Lip. And then the last one here would be between 2010 till present date. And I'm just going to include the Power Up, because it's technically the 2020, but there's no other albums in the 2020s after that, so I'm just going to include it with this category. So we have again just Rock or Bust in 2014 and Power Up in 2020. For this one again, I think it was a pretty easy selection. I'm going with Power Up as my favorite. The newest album, it's really, really good. I love this album. I've been listening to it quite a lot actually. Shot in the Dark, Realize is really good. Rejection, let me see here, Through the Mist of Time, like just top to bottom, it's a really good album, really strong. I think it might be their best album since Razor's Edge, in my opinion. It's one of their really, I find it to be a really strong album, and I really love the album cover too, the black and red, really awesome. So that kind of just leaves Rock or Bust. Unfortunately for the later period of AC/DC, they only put out about 1 or 2 albums every decade, so there wasn't really, it was just kind of picking which one you prefer out of the 2. But Rock or Bust is decent. the title track, Play Ball, or the singles, Dogs of War, I remember being good. But it's not one I go back to as much as the other albums, so by default it was kind of on this decade, it was kind of automatically the least favorite. Okay guys, so I do appreciate you watching the video, and let me know down below what your favorite and least favorite albums from AC/DC were from the decades, and leave comments down below, and I'll definitely again put a little link on the screen here for the other episode for Iron Maiden. Definitely check that out, and I appreciate you guys watching the video, and until next time, keep it metal.